Axel Gumbel here with the Mayo Clinic News Center, and we're back with Matt Dacy, Director of Heritage Days, and also Renee Ziemer with the archive here at Mayo Clinic. And we're here to talk about a new exhibit. And by the way, you can see maybe that Renee has her white gloves on, and that means she brought something very neat. But first, let's talk to Matt real quick. Talk about this very fascinating exhibit right behind us.
Axel and colleagues, this is a new exhibit in Matthew's Grand Lobby of the Mayo Building. It links the costumes of Downton Abbey with the story of the Mayo family. And there were two major issues that tied these fictional family of the Crawleys in Downton Abbey with the founders of Mayo together. One was a shared experience with the RMS Titanic, and the other was inheritance issues. Both families had to think what would they do with their assets in the years going forward. So what we're seeing here are two costumes from the Downton Abbey exhibit. And these are 2 out of 30 that will be shown in the Kaler Grand Hotel starting mid-February through April. And you can go to chateaurochester.com to learn about that exhibit. But Mr. and Mrs. Matthews have brought this here to show life in the early 20th century. Here you're seeing a gown worn by the character of Lady Mary and a white tie and tails dinner suit worn by Matthew Crawley. The furniture here comes from the Mayo Clinic Historic Properties. Mayo Foundation House in Mayo would have many treasures given by the Mayo family and benefactors, and so you're seeing an antique clock, an oil painting, a Chinese urn, all these things to show life of the grand homes in the early 20th century.
And very briefly, Matt, for those who are not familiar with Downton Abbey, the series or the movie, can you give just a one-sentence synopsis that kind of ties it together with the Titanic disaster?
Sure. The Downton Abbey is a story of an English aristocratic family and how they coped with social changes in the early 1900s. They had 3 daughters and could not pass their estate through the female side, and their male heir died on the Titanic, so they were thrown into a great deal of issues and drama around that, and the fictional story plays out that way.
And of course, Matt, you hinted that Mayo Clinic does have a connection to this disaster, and that brings us to this glass dome here. What do we see underneath this dome?
This is one of the great what-if accounts of Mayo Clinic history. Dr. William Mayo, the Kaler, Mr. and Mrs. Kaler, and several of their family and friends were outbound from America going to Europe while the Titanic was coming from Europe to America. And Dr. Mayo was on the ocean when the Titanic went down. Several passengers on his ship had loved ones on the Titanic, so it was very, very close to them. And one of the great what-if questions of our history is if the iceberg that Dr. Mayo's ship saw had hit their vessel, they actually warned the Titanic of ice on the ocean, or if Dr. Mayo had been ending his trip rather than starting it and had possibly booked passage on the Titanic.
Wow, that is mind-boggling, and we want to bring in Renee for that. She brought a very interesting artifact. Renee, tell us about, this is a diary, I understand, that Dr. Will Mayo took on board of his travels.
Correct, yes. He documented everything fairly clearly. So on April 11th, they left New York and started the voyage. You'll see that there's a reference to passing the SS Baltic. The Baltic was one of the ships that warned the Titanic of icebergs, along with the ship that Dr. Will was on, the America. And you'll note here, specifically the Titanic with a red little dot. And there was some confusion on the ship that Dr. Will was on, whether the Titanic had actually sunk. Here you'll note that it said Titanic Disaster, so they knew something was going on, but it really wasn't confirmed until a few days later, actually 3 days after the sinking on the 18th. And then it's noted that they arrived on the 19th in Plymouth after a 7.5-day voyage.
Wow, what an artifact. Thank you for sharing that, Renee.
You're welcome.
Matt, you mentioned this is kind of a teaser exhibit here at the Mayo Clinic building lobby in Rochester. There's a much larger one also to be found. Could you share about that?
Sure. From mid-February through April 8th, we'll have more than 30 Downton Abbey costumes in the Kaler Grand Hotel. Of course, very significant to have it in the Kaler because Mrs. Kaler's diary is here. The Kalers were with the Mayos at that time. So chateaurochester.com has all the information. There was a discount for Mayo employees who go to that exhibit, so come and be inspired.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Matt, for sharing about this, and Renee, you as well, for sharing the artifact.
Sure.
And again, the exhibit will run here at the Mayo Clinic building lobby for about a couple of weeks till the end of the month, but you can also check out the larger exhibit at the Chateau Theater. Thanks for joining.